Welcome to SuperTalk, a podcast hosted by Hillside Public School Superintendent Glover. The goal of SuperTalk is to provide an informative platform where Hillside Public School students, staff, and stakeholders can have a candid conversation with the district superintendent, as well as be spotlighted for their hard work and initiatives.
Blessings, good afternoon, and welcome to another episode of Super Talk with Superintendent Glover, coming to you from Hillside Public Schools in the great town of Hillside, New Jersey. And today's podcast is a tribute to the upcoming Juneteenth celebration. And when you think about this season, right, as we are entering into the heat of the summer, I'm always reflective on how we can educate our young people around what does this newfound holiday really mean, right? Because so often we take the days off and we forget what it's really about. And I dug through my Rolodex and I said, well, who can I bring on to talk about Juneteenth and its historical relevance and make sure that it has a lasting impact in our minds of our students? So I thought about a great friend, colleague, a brother who we have actually traveled from undergraduate college to graduate school, and he now sits as an associate professor at the great Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. So I said, well, let's bring Dr. Samuel T. Livingston to the podcast and let him give us a little knowledge and school us today. Brother Sam,
glad to be here.
Dr. Samuel, let's introduce yourself. Let's give yourself a little couple minutes to let us know about you.
Okay, man. First of all, Brother Rod, I got to say, I know Dr. Glover, but you will always be my brother, man. So I'm, of course, going to be a little informal in addressing you, but y'all, I'm just going to say to your audience and to the Hillside, New Jersey educational community, the community of New Jersey, y'all are blessed to have a dedicated scholar warrior as a superintendent. And so, man, first of all, I'm just honored to be invited. And, I get invited lots of places to speak. But when you have a chance to actually speak with a fellow educator on this historic moment, it adds even more importance. So just like you said, I'm an associate professor of Africana Studies. Of course, more importantly, as we were talking a little bit off camera, I'm a Black father. A father of 3 girls, 3 Spelman women, who are all graduated from college, going about, doing their thing, building their lives and their careers and finding their path forward, their Ngia, as Dr. Sante would say, in terms of how they make a contribution to the world. So, man, I'm going to be in my 21st year at Morehouse College. I've been teaching.
Blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been teaching now. This is my 21st year at Morehouse, but I've been teaching since like 1992 is when I actually first started teaching at Temple, and 1993.
Right.
Yeah. So, teaching those African-American studies classes and history classes, or African-American studies and writing classes, actually. But man, I'm a dedicated scholar activist, doing work with Friends of the Congo, and basically still trying to tell those stories that get overlooked in the rough and tumble of this capitalist corporate media. Certain things stand out and are more attractive than others, but the stories of Black resistance and how we actually hold on to a culture that's very unique tends to be one of those things that gets lost in the sauce. So that's what I dedicate my life to, in terms of telling those stories. Working on a book project, we'll talk more about that, but it's called Centering 1526. At first, it was called the 1526 Project, but it sounded too much like we were capping back at Nicole Hannah-Jones in the 1619 Project. So I was like, nah, we got to change that a little bit. But but we are trying to actually correct some things that get omitted even in the 1619 narrative.
Brother, I don't think the audience really understands and fully understands the depth of this season, right?
Mm.
And I know you're going to touch upon it in our conversation. And I always like to tell my audience, like, we always say we're going to do 20, 25 minutes because, a podcast, you try to be mindful. And then I end up looking up and it's 40 minutes later, right? Because the conversation is just that rich. So I appreciate the introduction. And I want to say this so I want the audience to know that Brother Sam, Brother Dr. Livingston is a scholar. When I say scholar, a scholar who has written books, who has written articles, who has been in the forefront of this work on a variety of levels and connecting the continent, the African diaspora, Central America, South America, and then bringing it back home to where we're at today. So I'm bringing to me, I call it a heavy hitter. And this is a home run type of brother. When he steps to the plate, he might knock some knowledge into us that we weren't expecting. So I want you to be prepared when you delve into this conversation. It's not meant to go over your head. It's really meant to school us to where we need to be at as a people and as educators, as we lead these students. So if the conversation gets a little too deep for you today, forgive me, but I would be remiss if we didn't come into Juneteenth and really get the full flavor of what it's meant to be. So let's get it. Let's go. Let's rock, my brother.
Let's go, man.
Brother Sam, Dr. Livingston here. Let's start. I've seen you've done some. You've been on TV before. You've talked about this, I'm sure, in your courses at Morehouse. Let's talk about the importance of Juneteenth, right? Not the commercialization of Juneteenth,
yes, sir.
But the importance of Juneteenth. Talk to us about that, brother.
Okay, Ben. So just like you said, it's critical. They say all history and all politics are local, and we need to do that. We need to make sure that we pay attention to the local story of Juneteenth and how the Confederates in the 1860s during the Civil War in Texas, they have this long history of actually trying to break away and set up their own state, their own nation. So it wasn't surprising after the signing of the peace treaty at Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865 that Texas would continue to hold on to their enslaved Africans. Unfortunately, some of the Cherokee nations tried to do the same thing, but Texas was notorious. And so we find basically that the people at Galveston, Texas, the enslaved Africans there, who of course were free under the letter of the law, but under the tyranny of a few tyrants, of a few self-styled dictators. And I rhyme and echo a lot of what happens in the 1860s and 1870s with what's happening today with the rise of fascism and wannabe dictators today. But they haven't studied history. And unfortunately, we haven't enough. But what they'll find out soon enough is that Black folks, we're not going backwards. We might put a lot of stuff, but we're not going backwards. But so the story is local. At Galveston, the enslaved Africans had gotten some word. The freedom had come because there was always that underground knowledge network that Dr. Vincent Harding talks about so well in his book, There's a River. And so basically there was some rumblings, but what actually happened was that a Union general, General Granger, sent a group of his soldiers, a small force of his soldiers. And these soldiers were actually a Black regiment. So one of the things that we don't talk about is that it was actually a Black regiment under a white commander, yes, but a Black regiment that basically came in with their rifles, with the bayonets, and basically under the force of Black arms. The word was delivered on June 19th of 1865 that slavery's over. Slavery's over. So we've taken that name, we've taken that term, Juneteenth, to signify the consistent Black struggle for freedom. And, I rarely use the word emancipate in terms of dealing with our freedom struggle, because that may be accurate in terms of the white version of the story. They were emancipating, they were freeing out of their hand enslaved African people, but we never waited. Your boy Kanye West made news several years ago for talking about how for 400 years Black folks were enslaved or slaves. And he said for 400 years, that sounds like a choice. And what we need to take away is that Juneteenth, in many ways, is one of those capstone moments in 339 years of Black resistance against slavery. The first Black folks show up or brought to the American shores not in 1619, as we said, but in July or late or early August of 1526. 100 enslaved Africans were brought. Unlike the 1619 project, we talk about in 1526 the significance of three things that we need to remember about African American history or African history in the Americas. First, we always resisted. There was a slave rebellion that marked the 1526 date. So we say that that place of San Miguel de Guadape, which was probably in South Georgia, was actually the first place where there was a Black slave rebellion, where there was an enslaved African rebellion in America. 1619 doesn't really deal with that theme of resistance. There's a whole thematic trajectory of 1619. The 1619 project which is much more about what America owes to us. So kind of like justifying this reparations argument, which I agree with. But at the same time, we cannot afford to leave out any aspects of our history, especially when it comes to resistance. Long story short, there were 313, between 275 and 313 slave rebellions over the course of 339 years, from 1526 to 1865. That averages to little under one major slave rebellion per year. And I always say that really that we're undercounting. We're probably undercounting, as Dr. Nikki Taylor in her new book, Brooding Over Bloody Revenge, the story of Black women and their slave rebellions, their planned slave rebellions. So we have really undercounted. So the story of Juneteenth is about that resistance part. Second thing, the connection with Africa. When we talk about what's happening either in 1526 or all the way up to 1865, Black folks are always connected with the continent of Africa. And I'd say it's kind of telling that after slavery is over, one of the first things we try to do, in addition to trying to find our family members, we take out our editorials and we try to reconnect with our family. But several Black folks actually begin thinking about, all right, it's time to go. It's not time to actually be here. The majority of us would make that decision to stay here, but there were lots of Black folks who made that connection. So we always want to talk about that. And folks from the Caribbean traversed through Texas, through Louisiana, and those areas. And the third thing is that aspect of the connection with the Caribbean. And the fact of Juneteenth echoes what we have as Emancipation Day in Jamaica and the celebration of the Haitian Revolution, as well. So basically, I agree with Greg Carr that Juneteenth is one of the major markers of what he calls the freedom season, from Memorial Day of May 31st to June 19th. And sure, you can even say July 4th. But of course, we always raise that question, like Frederick Douglass did, what to the enslaved African is the 4th of July? What does that mean for a person who's enslaved? So Juneteenth is local, and we have to, of course, salute the efforts of modern folks like Elder Opal Lee, who actually walked, did a pilgrimage of walking from Texas, Houston, Texas, to Washington, D.C. to make sure that this holiday was a national holiday. And so, I celebrate it. Some people say we shouldn't be federal, but I celebrate anytime that we get a chance to remember Black resistance and our freedom struggle, then I'm going to take that opportunity.
So, folks, I want you to understand something. I said that today was going to be a little heavier than our normal conversations, because a lot of times we celebrate dates and we don't know the history behind those dates. And it's important that our scholars be given the platforms to be able to communicate some things that we didn't know. But I want to touch upon those 3 points, right? Because I want to connect to what we're talking about, what we see happening in communities today, and what our young people, especially in our school communities, our higher education and secondary spaces of elementary and secondary education, what they may be missing or the curriculum may be missing. But this idea of resistance, right? That's an important and heavy theme that we still experience and see today throughout many aspects in the Black community and others. The connection to the continent, and I think elaborating on what that connection really should look like, right? Because some people say, is there an international trade connection? Is there a spiritual connection? Which you might be able to elaborate on what, when you say unpack the word connection to the continent, and equally the connection to the Caribbean, right? Because so many of us travel to the Caribbean for enjoyment. Few of us travel to the Caribbean for cultural enrichment, right? We go for the beaches, the warm weather, right? And some of us, like myself, love to go and connect with my people and see what are the similarities that between the continent and America, right? So let's unpack that a little bit, because I want to, like I said, I'm taking my people to school today. Talk about where you see the similarities existing right now in those three areas where we are today, 2024.
Okay, no, definitely. First of all, our open enemies of Black freedom, otherwise known as conservatives or the GOP in this country, they are clear. So when they say they want to end the teaching of African American studies or the teaching of Black history, they know why. Because if you study it, then you actually have to take note of our freedom tradition, that liberation tradition. So first, that's the first thing. So again, just, to really reiterate, and you can't teach Black history without teaching the history of the Black freedom struggle. It wasn't just the 313 slave rebellions that Joseph Holloway talks about, or the 275 that Aptheker and other folks talk about, which probably, again, is an undercount. But you also have thousands of Black people who are running away, moving away to the South, into Florida. In our history, we forget the fact that one of the major wars internally that America fought to suppress Native Americans, there were more Black people fighting in those wars than there were Native Americans. Now, that's not Samuel Livingston. That is the testimony of Union forces who went down there and fought in the three Seminole Wars. So I agree with Yusuf Clay, and when he calls those Seminole Wars the Gullah Wars, I call them the Gullah Seminole Wars, to make sure that we are fully paying respect to our Native American brothers and sisters and ancestors as well. So Black folks actually fought a couple of wars to get out of slavery, but we forget that when we create these narratives that are more about, well, let's get along with white people. We got to get along with white people. That's not a problem. But if we can't get along based upon the truth, then we're building our relationship based upon a lie. So we can't do that. So that's critical. So that resistance took many forms. Like I said, acts of rebellion, folks running away, forming maroon communities, but really also the fact of Black people getting their freedom in 1865, and immediately after that, in my home state of South Carolina, which you know very well, as Dean Willie Harriford and Dr. Grace Jordan McFadden and others taught us, is that we basically organized. We assisted on three things, especially 3 or 4 as always. I always try to deal with 3 or 4 things because it's a short list.
Right.
But the access to education, the ownership of land, the right to vote, and in the case of after the 15th Amendment, it was only Black men, but still the right to vote, and then the insistence upon our civil and human rights. And included in that, would be the ability of Black folks to build our own institutions in the way that we saw fit. So I think that's fully a part of this story too. And I think Juneteenth echoes in all of that. You hear in many ways, this is a good opportunity to reflect on those things. When it comes to the Caribbean, there's no Black resistance without influence from the Caribbean. So I know some of our brothers and sisters articulate this identity about American descendants of slavery or foundational Black America. But if that does not include our Caribbean brothers and sisters from Jamaica, from Haiti, from Trinidad, from Barbados, then you are telling a false version of African American history or Black history in general. So again, the most revolutionary thing is truth. It's easy to create propaganda to convince folks, hey, look, let's go do such and such, let's do whatever based upon lies. But actually telling the truth is the only way that you're going to address some of the historic problems that we see in this country. So we got to tell the full truth. And then, of course, the connection with Africa. One of the main ways that I'm engaged in scholar activism is in connecting African Americans with Africa, but with the Congo in particular, because in many ways, if we say that the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice, and that the moral arc of history bends towards justice, the fulcrum in the case of the modern world is in the Congo Basin. Because if it wasn't for the exploitation, the destruction of Congolese kingdoms, the Kingdom of Congo, the Kingdom of Luba, the Kingdom of Lunda, the Matamba Kingdom, if you didn't destroy those kingdoms, then you wouldn't have the diaspora in the way that we have it today, to such an extent where 1 in 4 African American men especially, because there were so many warriors taken out because of the internal warfare, in terms of being captured by the Portuguese and the Dutch and other folks, that so a large percentage of African American men, we estimate between 25 to about 46%, actually were taken from the Congo region specifically. But Congo today provides the basis of the technology, the cobalt that goes into Americas and the global war machines, jet engines and all that. The uranium for the atomic bomb was taken from a mine called Kolwezi in Congo. And so all of these things are significant for the modern world, but they are also important for us because it was the destruction of those African kingdoms that allowed, that facilitated our being transported here. So that's not to say we need to try to reconstitute the Congo kingdom, but we need to study and understand what happened to us. And that's one of the reasons why, Rod, my undergraduate major was psychology. I really wanted to understand what has happened to us, where we built the basis of world civilization. But then today, like Marcus Garvey says, every place you look at Black people, we are at the bottom of society. What happened to us? Yeah. So I think we need to take that question seriously. And Juneteenth is a great opportunity to reflect on it.
So Brother Sam, talk to us about where schools are misstepping, right? Because listen to, you said there's 4 points, right? There's the understanding of the importance of education, land, voting, and civil and human rights, right? And, we were fortunate this year to be able to be one of the districts chosen to pilot the AP African American Studies class, right? And I know you're actively aware of that. You've unpacked that, right? So that's probably a whole nother day of podcast conversations and all the controversy that came around that. But that's just one course. No, that's just one course, right? But where do we need to look at our educational systems and find spaces that we can become more consistent and intertwining these aspects of educational growth development, understanding of land, the importance of holding on to it and then building it up, right? And the importance of voting, right? And we could, I'm gonna just leave it there. Importance of voting and then civil and human rights. Talk to us about where in the educational spaces, higher ed and secondary ed, where do we need to make some adjustments and grow? Or where are we misstepping?
Yeah. We're misstepping by trying to create a special category for American Negroes instead of actually insisting on our full humanity. Any other diasporic group attempts to, even if they can't do it perfectly, to trace the cultural and lineage origins of their people. It could be the diaspora of Lebanese people, of Vietnamese people, whatever it is. And we know why. We know the difficulty of what it means to actually try to trace that origin for African Americans. But the difficulty does not excuse us from the responsibility that we have to our children, because our children want to know their origins. They want to know their origins. When they see that our schools either make it like, oh, this is something that you can learn, or something that you that you should not learn, or that you will not learn in this class or in this curriculum, then that sends a message that the education system does not center them and therefore is not important. And when our kids have the message that they aren't central and important in the process, then they rebel. They either quiet quit, they act out in class, they turn off and tune out. So one of the things that we do in African American studies at Morehouse, and I know it's different from, in the general curriculum, but one of the things that we do is to center the students. So they have to write their cultural autobiography in our major. And I think this is actually something that we could do with our students across the board in English, in our history classes, that would actually get our students much more into the study if they actually center themselves and their families. So we challenge them. Tell the story of how you show up here at Morehouse College. And we could say the same thing. How do we show up at in this high school, in this middle school? And this is an assignment that students can do all the way down into elementary and with different levels of learning outcomes along Bloom's taxonomy or whatever. But so that's one thing. Center the students, have them tell their story of themselves and their family, and also center what they're interested in and what they're concerned about. I was looking at a couple of polls for another project I was working on, showing that Americans in general are really concerned with like the slipping place of American prestige, the fact that they're losing status when it comes to China and other places. And, having visited China, one of the things that I love and appreciate about that country, there's a lot, to criticize, but one of the things I love is that they are building their future based upon their remembrance of the past. So what they've created is what we call the Belt and Road Initiative, which actually tries to recreate the heyday of China's predominance in the global economy, where they were actually taking goods and products from Africa to China and trading with South America back in the 1500s. Again, the 1526 project. So really, that brings us to the second thing. We have to lengthen our memory, our collective memory, because, again, I use with my students the metaphor of the chessboard. And I ask them, what's the most powerful piece on the chessboard? And of course, the ones who play chess, they know it's your queen. And, the ones that you can position, your queen, your knights are really powerful because they can jump over pieces. But the least powerful is what? Your pawn.
The king. No, your pawn, right? You can take it away. Yep.
True. And it's your king is like basically just a glorified pawn in many ways. But that pawn can only see one step ahead. It can only see in one step ahead in a particular direction, unless it's taking, unless it's capturing. But that is a metaphor for the global community and who are the most powerful people on the planet. The most powerful people on the planet, collectively and individually, have a global mindset. They can see across time and place and see, I need to position myself in relationship to these folks. That's one of the reasons why we're talking about the Congo so much. It's not just going, repairing the damage of what was done during slavery. It is true. But the place that's growing fastest in global population is Africa. And the African Great Lakes region is one of those places where the is driving Africa's population growth. I mentioned population growth because that's what you want to do. You want to actually look at where the economies will be growing. And again, just looking into the future. And this is not based upon just speculation. Demographers and political scientists know that, Africa's population growth is faster than South Asia, faster than Latin America, and Europe is not even in the running. In America even is really not really in the running, which kind of raises the question, why are these conservatives so adamant against having more people come into the U.S., which are needed to actually grow the economy? Well, we know why, because the people who are coming, they look brown and black. and Asian, and so they want to limit that diversity that you see in America. Hence the attack on DEI. So we are engaged in a war. One of the books I always keep up here, I'm a frame over here just a little bit. I don't know if you can see it. It's a book by Jacob Carruthers called Intellectual Warfare. And I have it over here someplace. Don't worry about it. That's not a problem. I thought I had framed it. I thought I had put it in the right place. I was like, I can see it right there. But anyway, Dr. Carruthers' Intellectual Warfare is really important. And I think all of our educators need to read that book. It's not a let's attack whites book. No, it's let's actually assess what has happened to us. Let's assess what's happened to us and why do we find ourselves in a position where we're losing momentum, what Dr. Greg Carr calls the momentum of memory. And a large part of that is because we've lost our ability to see across time and place, which means that you have to be able to understand where you're coming from in order to really understand what's going on globally around you.
Brother Sam, I thank you for so far, shedding light on aspects of this work that you just sparked some lights in me. I just want to recap this for my audience. One of the things that you just said is about this centering the students, right, in the conversation of education and having them do this cultural biography. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to dig down and explore that more because I think that sounds like a beautiful assignment that should be a culminating assignment for all of my students, elementary through high school, right? Because let's be clear. Our students bring a lot of things to the table when they walk in the door, mm-hmm. and it doesn't stop when they go home. It continues to be part of their DNA and part of their cultural backpack when they walk in and out of the schoolhouse. And how do we capture that and cause that to be a conversation that is continued for them throughout the course of the year? And how do we engage them in that aspect of really truly understanding themselves in relationship to their family and then into their historical self, mm-hmm. and their relationship to our community and the diaspora. So that's important. And then lengthening our memory. I've been challenging my colleagues. What's the purpose of school, right? What is the purpose of school today for our kids? Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. You name several groups that they don't shorten their memory of history. They continue to lengthen their memory.
They lengthen.
We have struggled with that. We have struggled that. So that's a valid point. I know we're coming up on a good 20 plus minutes, and I just want to take a real quick commercial break because I'm going to make this a part 2. But just want to say this is Superintendent Glover coming to you with another episode of Super Talk, our Juneteenth Celebration edition here with Dr. Samuel Livingston. And we are having a great conversation today, and we want to continue that conversation. So